Hey, this is Teresa Matsura, and you're listening to Uncanny Japan. Today, let me read you a story concerning tea. It's called Concerning Tea. Would you like to explore the stranger, more obscure corners of Japanese culture? Dig a little deeper into superstitions, curious customs, and all those mysterious creatures that inhabit the land? If so, then this is the podcast for you. Uncanny Japan is where I, author Teresa Matsura, share all the fascinating tidbits I unearth while doing research for my writing. From the bizarre to the ghastly, and everything in between. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey, there is so much to say. I made the edits deadline for the Book of Japanese Folklore at the expense of doing anything else for a couple weeks. I just looked up, and it's probably around 24 hours before we need to get this episode up. So I found a delightful, in the public domain piece about Japanese tea. It's a little long, so I took just the parts about Japanese tea, not English or Chinese tea. Although I encourage you to read it on Gutenberg. It's quite interesting. This is just one chapter of an old book called Myths and Legends of Japan by F. Hadland Davis. And I'll put a link on the website. Next episode, I have more big news, and I'm going to take you on a trip around a Japanese summer Obon festival. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that. I have ideas, and I'm imagining some choice words and audio magic from sound guy Rich Pav. It'll be fun. For you and I, at least. And before I start, let me explain a word in the opening quote. Horai-san, or Mount Horai. It's a mythical mountainous island, originally from China, called Mount Penglai in Chinese. It's also mentioned in the ancient Japanese text, the Nihon Shoki. So the story did make its way to Japan. There are many magical and outright surreal things that happen on this mountain. It's where the Chinese 8 immortals live. Also, there are birds and beasts that are completely white. All the palaces are made of silver, gold, and jade, and jewels grow on trees. It's kind of a paradise. It's a lovely quote, but when you hear it, I don't think he's drinking the normal kind of tea, if you know what I mean. A side note, Japanese fancy gardens usually have parts that symbolize water or bridges, etc. In some of them, there's an area called Horai-san, which refers to an inaccessible island in the garden, which is totally on brand, because that's what Horai-san is, a quite inaccessible island. Also, F. Hadland Davis says that he derived most of the material for this chapter from the Book of Tea by Okakura Kazuko. And he warmly commends this very charming volume to those who are interested in the subject. Okay, let's have some tea. Chapter 24, Concerning Tea. A quote by Lo Tong. The first cup moistens my lips and throat. The second cup breaks my loneliness. The third cup searches my inmost being. The fourth cup raises a slight perspiration. All the wrong of life passes away through my pores. At the fifth cup, I am purified. The sixth cup calls me to the realms of the immortals. The seventh cup? But I could take no more. I only feel the breath of cool wind that rises in my sleeves. Where is Horai-san? Let me ride on this sweet breeze and waft away thither. The Japanese tea ceremony. It is believed that the great Buddhist saint Dengyo Daishi introduced tea into Japan from China in AD 805. In any case, tea drinking in Nippon was associated with Buddhism, and most particularly of the Zen sect, which had incorporated so many of the Taoist doctrines. The priests of this order drank tea from a single bowl before the image of Bodhidharma, Daruma. They did so in the spirit of reverence and regarded the tea drinking as a holy sacrament. It was this Zen observance, strictly of religious nature, which finally developed into the Japanese tea ceremony. The tea ceremonies, writes Professor B.F. Chamberlain, have undergone 3 transformations during the 600 or 700 years of their existence. They have passed through a medico-religious stage, a luxurious stage, and lastly, an aesthetic stage. In the religious stage, the Buddhist priest Eisai wrote a pamphlet entitled The Salutary Influence of Tea Drinking, in which he asserted that this beverage had the power to drive away evil spirits. He introduced a religious ceremonial in regard to the worship of ancestors, accompanied by the beating of drums and the burning of incense. Eisai wrote this tract with the intention of converting Minamoto no Sanetomo from his vicious love of the wine cup, and endeavored to show the superiority of the tea plant over the juice of the grape. We find that the tea ceremonies for the time being lost their religious significance. The daimyos, writes Professor Chamberlain, who daily took part in them, reclined on couches spread with tiger skins and leopard skins. The walls of the spacious apartments in which the guests assembled were hung, not only with Buddhist pictures, but with damask and brocade, with gold and silver vessels, and swords in splendid sheaths. Precious perfumes were burnt, rare fishes and strange birds were served up with sweetmeats and wine, and the point of the entertainment consisted in guessing where the material for each cup of tea had been produced. For as many brands as possible were brought in, to serve as a puzzle or jeu de société. Every right guess procured, for him who made it, the gift of one of the treasures that were hung around the room. But he was not allowed to carry it away himself. The rules of the tea ceremonies, as then practiced, ordained that all the things rich and rare that were exhibited must be given by their winners to the singing and dancing girls, troops of whom were present to help the company in their carousal. This variety of tea ceremony, which appears to have been more of an orgy than anything else, reflected the luxurious and dissolute age in which it was practiced. The tea ceremony, in its more enduring and characteristic form, was destined to abandon all vulgar display, to embrace a certain amount of religion and philosophy, and above all, to afford a means of studying art and the beauty of nature. The tea room became not a place of carousal, but a place where the wayfarer might find peace in solemn meditation. Even the garden path leading to the tea room had its symbolic meaning, for it signified the first stage of self-illumination. The following was Kobori Enshui's idea of the path leading to the tea room. A cluster of summer trees, a bit of the sea, a pale evening moon. Such a scene was intended to convey to the wayfarer a sense of spiritual light. The trees, sea, and moon awakened old dreams, and their presence made the guest eager to pass into the greater joys of the tea room. No samurai was allowed to take his sword into the fragrant sanctuary of peace, and in many tea rooms there was a low door through which the guest entered and bowed head as a sign of humility. In silence the guest made obeisance before a kakemono, or some simple and beautiful flower on a tokonoma, alcove, and then seated themselves upon the mats. When they had done so, the host entered, and the water was heard to boil in the kettle with a musical sound, because of some pieces of iron which it contained. Even the boiling of the kettle was associated with poetical ideas, for the song of water and metal was intended to suggest the echoes of a cataract muffled by clouds, of a distant sea breaking among the rocks, a rainstorm sweeping through a bamboo forest, or of the soughing of pines on some faraway hill. There was a sense of harmony in the tea room. The light was like the mellow light of evening, and the garments of the company were as quiet and unobtrusive as the gray wings of a moth. In this peaceful apartment, the guests drank their tea and meditated, and went forth into the world again better and stronger for having contemplated in silence the beautiful and the noble in religion, art, and nature, seeking always to be in harmony with the great rhythm of the universe. They were ever prepared to enter the unknown. The passing of Rikiu. Rikiu is one of the greatest of tea masters, and for long he remained the friend of Taiko Hideyoshi. But the age in which he lived was full of treachery. There were many who were jealous of Rikiu, many who sought his death. When a coldness sprang up between Hideyoshi and Rikiu, the enemies of the great tea master made use of this breach of friendship by spreading the report that Rikiu intended to add poison to a cup of tea and present it to his distinguished patron. Hideyoshi soon heard of the rumor, and without troubling to examine the matter, he condemned Rikiu to die by his own hand. On the last day of the famous tea master's life, he invited many of his disciples to join with him in his final tea ceremony. As they walked up the garden path, it seemed that ghosts whispered in the rustling leaves. When the disciples entered the tea room, they saw a kakemono hanging in the tokonoma, and when they raised their sorrowful eyes, they saw that the writing described the passing of all earthly things. There was a poetry in the singing of the kettle, but it was a sad song, like the plaintive cry of an insect. Rikiu came into the tea room, calm and dignified, and according to custom, he allowed the chief guest to admire the various articles associated with the tea ceremony. When all the guests had gazed upon them, noting their beauty with a heavy heart, Rikiu presented each disciple with a souvenir. He took his own cup in hand and said, "Never again shall this cup, polluted by the lips of misfortune, be used by man." Having spoken these words, he broke the cup as a sign that the tea ceremony was over, and the guest bade a sad farewell and departed. Only one remained to witness, not the drinking of another cup of tea, but the passing of Rikiu. The great master took off his outer garment and revealed the pure white robe of death. Still calm and dignified, he looked upon his dagger and then recited the following verse with unfaltering voice. "Welcome to thee, O sword of eternity, through Buddha and through Dharma alike. Thou hast cleft thy way." He who loved to quote the old poem, "To those who long only for flowers fain, would I show the full-blown spring which abides in the toiling buds of snow-covered hills," has crowned the Japanese tea ceremony with an immortal flower. The legend of the tea plant. Dharma was an Indian sage whose image, as we have already seen, was associated with the ritualistic drinking of tea by the Zen sect in Japan. He is said to have been the son of a Hindu king and received instruction from Panyatara. When he had completed his studies, he retired to Loyang, where he remained seated in meditation for 9 years. During this period, the sage was tempted after the manner of St. Anthony. He wrestled with these temptations by continually reciting sacred scriptures, but the frequent repetition of the word jewel lost its spiritual significance and became associated with the precious stone worn in the ear of a certain lovely woman. Even the word lotus, so sacred to all true Buddhists, ceased to be the symbol of the Lord Buddha and suggested to Daruma the opening of a girl's fair mouth. His temptations increased, and he was transported to an Indian city, where he found himself among a vast crowd of worshippers. He saw strange deities with horrible symbols upon their foreheads, and rajas and princes riding upon elephants, surrounded by a great company of dancing girls. The great crowd of people surged forward, and Daruma with them, till they came to a temple with innumerable pinnacles, a temple covered with a multitude of foul forms. And it seemed to Daruma that he met and kissed the woman who had changed the meaning of jewel and lotus. Then suddenly the vision departed, and Daruma awoke to find himself sitting under the Chinese sky. The sage who had fallen asleep during his meditation was truly penitent for the neglect of his devotions, and taking a knife from his girdle, he cut off his eyelids and cast them upon the ground, saying, "O thou perfectly awakened!" The eyelids were transformed into the tea plant, from which was made a beverage that would repel slumber and allow good Buddhist priests to their vigils. Daruma. Daruma is generally represented without legs, for according to one version of the legend we have just given, he lost his limbs as the result of the 9-year meditation. Netsuke carvers depict him in a full bag-like garment, with a scowling face and lidless eyes. He is sometimes presented in Japanese art as being surrounded with cobwebs, and there is a very subtle variation of the saint portrayed as a female Daruma, which is nothing less than a playful jest against Japanese women who could not be expected to remain silent for 9 years. An owl is frequently associated with Daruma, and in his journey to Japan, he is pictured as standing on waves, supported by a millet stalk. 3 years after Daruma's death, he was seen walking across the western mountains of China, and it was observed that he carried one shoe in his right hand. When Daruma's tomb was opened by the order of the emperor, it was found only to contain a shoe, which the saint had forgotten to take with him. The end. Thank you all for listening, and thank you, patrons, for everything. Please consider becoming a patron if you'd like and if you can. I've started putting up Sunday night, my time blog posts about more everyday Japanese life kind of things. There's also the monthly bedtime story, which was one of mine in July, as well as at least one other type of content per month. Binaural soundscapes or recipes, and I just asked my son Julian, who's a musician and did the intro for Uncanny Japan, among other things, if he could put some music to some summer sounds we recorded. This time, cicada, water trickling, to make some relaxing vibes for patrons. I just got the music and it's fantastic. It's 20 minutes, so a perfect Pomodoro for when I work, but I'll be putting that up for patrons too in August. And with that, I'll say bye-bye, and I'll talk to you again in 2 weeks. You've reached the end of the show, and I just want you to know how much we appreciate you listening and supporting us. Any subscribing, reviewing, and gushing to your friends, family, even random strangers really does help keep us going. If you have the means and you want to help a little more and get a little more, we are making extra content over on Patreon, all for only $5 a month. Or if you like to read horror, you might be interested in my Bram Stoker-nominated short story collection, The Carp-Faced Boy and Other Tales. 本当にありがとうございます. Thank you again, and I'll talk to you real soon.